Welcome to the Work, Wealth, and Travel podcast. I'm your host, Nicole, and this podcast is your guide to start creating a lifestyle by design. From entrepreneurship, money and finance, tax optimization and residencies, and everything in between, this show highlights the nuances of a true global citizen lifestyle. Let's dive in. Welcome back to today's episode of the Work, Wealth, and Travel podcast. And in today's episode, I sit down with Julian from PointsPath. In this conversation, we really dive into the details and the nitty-gritty of how you can easily and efficiently start to earn travel points. But not only that, we dive into tips, tricks, tools, and resources that you can start implementing today from your laptop on how you can really start to look for flights more efficiently and for more economical pricing of flights, even if you are looking to purchase a business class flight. Of course, we dive into some of his top options for almost anyone in the American credit card system of the credit cards that you should be starting with to get points. And we also dive into some potential myths and debunk them that we've all heard, such as booking a flight on a Tuesday and why these no longer ring true. So let's dive into today's episode.
So I actually had a career. My first career was in television and film. I was a writer, I was a director, and one of the jobs I did towards the end of that was working for World Wrestling Entertainment, WWE. And as part of that, I was traveling all over the country here in the United States, all around the world, doing television for the company. Everyone there, as you would imagine, who's traveling learns their frequent flyer mile programs very quickly because it's part of, the part of your life at that point. So everybody is very knowledgeable. There's an entire subculture there. After I finished that job, I did that job for about 2 years, and I was looking for a way to use that knowledge I had accumulated and try to help people who didn't know as much. So I started writing for a small blog called Hack My Trip. Then I started writing for a bigger blog. Eventually, I was hired as a writer for The Points Guy, which is one of the biggest websites in the world covering frequent flyer miles. Eventually, I was actually running that site as the editorial director. Then I went over to CNN and did the same thing for them, for their underscored platform, writing about travel, credit cards, how to best use your rewards. And then that brought me to where I am today, because through all of that, I always wanted a way to help people use their miles that didn't involve them digging for hours through a blog or a website trying to find the answer. I wanted a way that I could just tell them, use your miles on this flight, don't use your miles on that flight. And that's how I got to become the founder and CEO of PointsPath, which is exactly what we do.
So you really know the industry. So we're going to dive in, which I'm excited for. But what is the solution that you created, and how does that really help the everyday user who's looking to purchase a flight for business, for holiday, whatever it may be?
Right. So there are two problems that everyone has with frequent flyer miles. There's two reasons that they are frustrating to many people. The first is, of course, you can never find flights you actually want to use your miles on, right? You find flights that are two stops or overnight or whatever it might be, instead of a flight that you actually want to take. And then even when you do find a flight that you want to take, you can't tell if you're getting a good deal or not. Should you be using miles or should you be using cash? So what PointsPath does, it's a browser extension. It runs in Google Chrome or Microsoft Edge, and it runs on top of Google Flights, which is one of the most popular search engines for flights, at least in the United States and elsewhere as well. And when you have PointsPath installed and you do a search in Google Flights, say New York to Los Angeles on October 5th, Google will give you all the cash prices for those flights. PointsPath will add in next to the cash prices all the points prices for those flights, live data, the live points prices, just like the cash prices. And then between the two, we'll show you a deal recommendation arrow, which will either say use cash for this flight, use miles for that flight. The flight is a good deal with miles. This flight is a great deal with miles. And that is how we're trying to help people. So in just literally 5 seconds, you've got the answer you need. You don't have to dig around the airline site and try and calculate all this stuff manually.
I want to talk about Google Flights. You mentioned, now, is it only compatible with Google Flights? And then why Google Flights? So, like, is that where you could find the best deals? Or...
So right now it is only running on top of Google Flights. We may expand it later to other sites. We can do that. We just the reason we chose Google Flights in the first place is number one, it has become somewhat ubiquitous here in the US, being the first place that people go to search for flights, partially because it is simple. It is itself a fairly simple, easy to understand search engine. It's also very fast. And we've tried to make PointsPath run fast as well. So you have those answers in just a few seconds. That's really what has made Google's flights popular. Obviously, it's also run by Google and they are ubiquitous. So a lot of people just go to them by default. That's why we chose Google Flights. Google Flights is also pretty good about finding good deals. I wouldn't necessarily say it's the very best on the internet that does that, but you'll generally get a good price if you're using Google Flights. And especially if you don't want to dig really hard into other, you know, obscure search engines, it's often the best choice and the fastest way to go.
So you mentioned to me off of air when we were speaking before the recording that you see a lot of users getting frustrated with points, with miles. Talk to me a little bit about what you have seen being in this industry for so long. And yeah, I mean, of course, your plugin is one way to mitigate this, but some other ways that you've seen to mitigate this frustration in the space as
It's
well.
really interesting, Nicole, because points and miles have gotten extremely big here in the US. And a lot of that is because of the credit card market. In the United States, credit cards are huge, and a lot of them are driven by rewards, whether it's cash back, whether it's travel points. A lot of people get credit cards in the US because can earn rewards with them. And so miles have grown as a result, and the whole industry has really grown to the point that the US airlines, American, Delta, United, are often making just as much money, if not more, off of the frequent flyer program as they are for flying the planes. And that is developed over the decades or over the years. Obviously, that's not how it started. So, what's really interesting is that as it's gotten bigger and people have gotten more interested in it, I think it's also gotten more complicated. In the old days, airlines tended to have set award charts, and they would say, if you're going from New York or from the United States to Europe in economy, that's going to cost you 50,000 miles round trip. And that was the set price. And as long as you could find a available seat at that price, that was the price you get. More so now, airlines are using what we call dynamic pricing, which means that that price is no longer set at 50,000 miles. It now fluctuates, not tied directly to the cash price, but more along the lines of high demand times, you're going to see higher points prices the same way you'll see higher cash prices. Now, the good news is that for most programs, like I said, they are not directly tied to the cash point price. So that is exactly the sort of time where you want to be able to get in there and leverage that difference. When there's a high cash price, a lower points price, that's the time to strike. And so that's what's the complexity has, as it always does, added more opportunity if you know how to look and when to look.
This is really interesting because you know this is obviously your area of expertise, but I'm curious. So you mentioned about a lot of these airlines are, of course, making money off the airline, but also making money off of the frequent flyer option that they have. So how does that work? I'm just curious from a logistic perspective, like how does that work almost as a second business that I think a lot of people don't really know is so much of a moneymaker for these conglomerates?
Right. That's a great question because you'd say, well, don't they give these miles to you for free? So how are they making money? And the answer is that the airlines, are selling those miles to the banks for the credit cards, which then are giving you the miles when you use your credit card. So every time you earn miles or points with your credit card on a purchase, the bank is having to buy those miles from the airline at a negotiated price that they've negotiated. And every airline has a different deal with every bank. So they are, and obviously they're not doing it. If you get 2 miles, they're not buying 2 miles, they're buying them in millions and millions at a time. So it becomes a lot of money. And that is one of the big places that airlines are making their money. It's also why you're seeing every airline have some sort of a banking partner, both in the US and internationally. There's often different banking partners in different countries. Obviously, the rules vary and the laws vary from country to country, but that's really where a lot of the money comes from. There's also airlines will sell you miles. We generally don't recommend buying miles, but they will sell you miles. And there's other ways that airlines can make money off the miles. But the key is really the bank partnerships. That's where they're making their millions of dollars.
I would have never thought that. But it makes sense. Yeah, interesting business for them that's evolved over the years. Um, while we're on this topic quickly, I just want to ask you because I'm curious because I do travel and fly quite often. Is there I feel like there's a myth, and I think it's a myth where you're supposed to do incognito to book and then book it on a Tuesday and book it what like 2.5 months in advance. Like, is there a right time for any of this?
Glad, Nicole, that you said the word myth, because that is exactly what all of that is. Searching incognito, especially with Google Flights, is not going to make any difference. You're going to get the same prices. And as far as when to book, in the past, people have said, oh, Tuesdays are a great time to book, Wednesdays. That may have been true 10, 15 years ago when airlines loaded in all their fares on a particular day into their computer systems. But that doesn't happen anymore. Those fares are adjusted on a minute by minute basis. So booking on a particular day doesn't really help. Now, with that said, flying on a particular day can make a difference. If you are flying midweek, you may very well get a better price because there's lower demand versus, say, a Friday or a Monday when everybody's trying to get home or get to where they need to be. So the travel date you're choosing, that can affect the price, but the day you're booking it doesn't really matter. Also, of course, as you get closer to your flight, as you get closer to departure, then the price does obviously go up because as there's more demand and there's fewer seats, the price is going to increase. So when you're in that week or so before the flight, you are going to see the price go up. But as far as specific day of the week, doesn't really matter.
Are there any other myths that you see in this industry that you have heard, seen that would be interesting for listeners to have debunked?
I've probably heard a million myths as far as and a million different theories on, some people say, oh, if I go to a website, an airline website, and get a price, and then I go away and return and refresh the page, I'll get a lower price or things like that. What generally has happened is maybe that happened to you once, but it happened just because the price happened to change while you were gone. It's not because you refreshed the browser using, some voodoo or something like that. It's just purely that particular instance. Generally, airfare prices don't change based on when or how you search. Hotel prices are a little different. Hotel prices can vary greatly depending on what site you're going through, depending on whether you're booking directly with the hotel, going through a big site like Expedia, you will see different prices. And you might see different prices if you're logged in as a user they know. So hotels is a different animal, but when it comes to flights, there's not a lot of variation between different sites or how you search. It's generally the same.
This is probably, to be fair, just me, but I always feel like when I have an account and I log in, they're tracking it more somehow. And so like they're gonna know if I keep searching for the same route, they're gonna know like I need this route on this day-ish or this week. And so then the prices are gonna creep up. But I don't know, maybe that's just
Well,
in my
you know
mind.
what? It's funny because that's logical to think that, and other industries probably do that, like an Uber or a Lyft. They may, I don't know personally, but they probably can see supply and demand. But airline technology is shockingly behind, and I have actually consulted for one of the big three airlines in the U.S., and I was really surprised at how little they do. They don't know their customers as well as you would think they would. So the kind of pricing that you're suggesting, while theoretically they could be doing it, they really aren't. And simply because they just don't really have the ability to do it. Now, that being said, when you're logged in, they do know, say, if you're logged in to American Airlines website, whether you have an American Airlines credit card. If you don't, they may show you an ad for one with an offer that could be tailored to you. That certainly happens. But as far as actual pricing of flights, yeah, it's a lot less personalized than that it probably should be, and probably that they'd like it to be.
Are you looking to become a diversified global citizen? If this is a lifestyle that you're seeking to create, we can help. Whether it be multiple residencies, citizenships, bank accounts, trusts, or company formations, we operate in 30 plus of the most tax friendly jurisdictions around the globe to get you structured properly. Head to the link in the show notes to learn more and to get your global citizen journey underway today. So, I want to talk about points and miles in terms of credit cards and how you can really start to accumulate those faster. So, let's talk specific to the US because I know that there are many more options within the US. But what are some cards or some other ways that you have seen that are interesting to you that you usually recommend to start
So the
accumulating?
first thing to keep in mind, at least in the United States, is that 2/3 of all frequent flyer miles that are in circulation are not earned from actually traveling. Most of the miles that people in the US are accumulating are getting them through credit cards, through shopping portals, through places like that. The actual travel miles have become a minority. As when it comes to credit cards, the best way to start is to get what we call a card that earns flexible points. And what that means is if you get an American credit card or a Delta credit card or United credit card, you're going to earn American miles, Delta miles, United miles. But if you get a card from, say, Chase, that runs on their Ultimate Rewards program, those points, not only can you use them to book travel directly and not have to go through an airline program, but if there's a better deal, you can transfer them to a set list of airline partners. For instance, Chase partners with United. So every Chase point that you want to transfer to United, you'll get one United mile on the other end. It's a 1-to-1 ratio, and you can transfer them anytime instantly. So, but in addition to United, you can also transfer to Southwest. You can also transfer to Hyatt. You can also transfer to British Airways. There's a list of over a dozen programs for Chase. American Express has the same thing with another list of airlines and hotels. Citibank, Capital One, they all have these transfer programs. And that sort of flexibility is what really makes those points valuable because there's no need to transfer them until you're ready to actually book. Until then, they can be anything. They can be any partner in the list they can be transferred to. So that's really where is the best place to start is get a card that earns flexible points and that'll open up a lot of options for you going forward.
And so, what are some of those cards that you just in general that you recommend for some of those flexible points to get
Yeah, there are
started?
two cards in particular in the US that I think are great starter cards. One of them is a Chase card. It's called the Chase Sapphire Preferred. A lot of people in the US have probably heard of that card in the past. It's been around for over a decade. It's sort of the granddaddy of travel rewards cards at this point. Like I said, it earns those flexible points that Chase calls ultimate rewards points that can be transferred to United and Southwest and all of those airlines. You can also book travel directly on Chase's site with those points and get 1.25 cents per point in travel value. So you're getting actually a little bonus rather than the usual just 1 cent per point just by booking through Chase. And you can book any flight or hotel available that way. You don't have to worry about availability and things like that. So that's one. The other option that I like for beginners is the Capital One Venture Card. And that is also the same thing that it has a nice set of transfer partners, but you can also use those points to either book travel directly or to redeem against travel that you book yourself with that Capital One card. You can use those points and just redeem them at 1 cent a point. The other beautiful thing about the venture card is it does earn 2 points for every dollar you spend on everything. The Chase card only earns 1 point for every dollar, but also has bonus categories like 3 points for 3 points for dining for every dollar you spend on dining, 2 points on travel. So it really comes down to what your spending patterns are. You're likely to spend more in the bonus categories than overall, and also look at those lists of transfer partners that are different on Chase and Capital One. Which one is more likely to fit your travel needs? And that's the card I would choose. The other thing is there's no reason you can't get both. You may not want to get them both at the same time, but there's no reason that you can't start with one and then 6 months or 12 months later get the other. Both cards come with lucrative sign-up bonuses. They vary depending on the time of year, but it can be anywhere from 60 to 80,000 points or miles after you spend usually about $4,000 in 3 months after you get the card. That is also a great way to get a nice stash of points to get rolling and be able to start actually looking at potential flights and things you can use your points for. Those bonuses are really, really helpful in getting rolling.
So, talking outside of the US market, are there any cards that you see that are lucrative for beginners or any starting tricks that you see when you're outside of the US?
It's tougher outside of the US. And the reason is, or let me rephrase, it's tougher to get a big amount of miles right off the top. The reason is that the laws in the US are very liberal when it comes to how much banks can charge merchants per transaction with a credit card. So the banks have more upside, they can earn more with a credit card usage. In other countries, especially in the European Union, all those fees are capped at a much lower level by law. So as a result, the entire ecosystem is just not as generous. You're not going to see those 60 or 80, 100,000 point bonuses because they simply don't have that kind of money in the industry to do it. It doesn't make sense from an industry perspective. You can still usually find some sort of bonus on a card in other countries. In Canada, or the American Express cards are popular, and usually you come with some small bonus. In other countries, it really does vary from country to country. So and also in many of these countries, they do have these transferable points in a lot of different countries. What's interesting is in each country, the transfer partner list can be different. It's not always the same as it is in the US. So when you're looking at a card, it's important to do some research and really dive into what is this card going to earn? What kind of points? How can I use them? And what's the value? And yeah, that will take you a little time to figure out, but you're probably only going to get, one credit card usually every couple of years at most. A lot of people go for a decade without changing their credit card. So really make sure you're getting the right one because it is a long-term purchase.
Do you foresee the rules and regulations in the US changing to become less favorable at any point in the future for users who are using this system for point hacking? Or do you see it becoming more lucrative in the future or staying the
That
same?
is a great question. So in 2008, there was a very similar ecosystem in the U.S. for debit cards, which are the difference between debit and credit. Of course, debit with money is coming instantly out of your bank account when you make the purchase, versus credit, which is just what it sounds like. You have 30 days plus a statement to pay it off, or you have to pay interest on the balance. And by the way, let me emphasize: if you are getting into this credit card game, if you will, or getting a credit card, always, always, always pay your entire balance in full and on time. Do not spend more than you would otherwise spend if you were simply using a debit card or cash. That is how people get into trouble with credit cards. They overspend and they buy things that they really can't afford. You lose the entire game. You lose the advantage the moment you pay a dime in interest, because those interest rates on credit cards are so high that it completely wipes out the balance of the value of your miles. So it's very important to avoid the interest by paying your entire bill in full and on time every single month. Track it, put it on auto pay, and make sure you don't miss. So just wanted to mention that. In any case, to your question, there was originally a similar ecosystem of points and miles around debit cards, but a law that was passed after the Great Recession in 2008, uh, called the Dodd-Frank Act, included caps on the transaction fees that banks could charge in those debit cards, and it really did kill the system. It really did kill the reward system. Now there is a proposed act by Senator Dick Durbin out of Illinois, who's proposing to do not the same thing with credit cards, but a similar cap of transaction fees. It's been very controversial because a lot of people point to that and say, look, this is exactly what happened with debit cards. You're going to destroy the system. The merchants, of course, want the fees capped because they're the ones paying it. So it's an ongoing battle. Who knows where it will end up? It'll depend on the results of the election and going forward. But it could change. It's always possible. Right now, though, it is what it's been for a long time. But who knows what the future will hold?
I feel like if it changed, that would be interesting for the worst because no other country in the world really has this system, right? So I'm curious, like, obviously we don't know, but I'm curious what it would look like going forward if there was a change where nobody in the world, regardless of where you live, can really earn and accumulate the points and miles to the degree that they
Yeah,
could.
I personally think a change like that is very anti-consumer friendly. I think it's really not the way to go. The other thing to keep in mind is that, as I mentioned, these programs have become so valuable to the airlines during the pandemic, when the airlines in the U.S. needed loan guarantees from the government or from private lenders. They often put up the frequent flyer program as the collateral for those loans. If you change the ecosystem by capping transaction fees, those programs are not going to be anywhere near as valuable. And all the money that the government just put into saving the airlines during the pandemic is going to have been wasted. They're going to be right back where they were as far as having business issues. So I think it's a short-sighted. It would be a short-sighted move. But you know, I'm not a U.S. senator, so it's not up to me at the end of the day.
Okay, this has been a really interesting conversation. Is there anything else that you feel like we should touch on in this conversation that we
Yeah, I
haven't?
would just say I think a lot of people have tried using miles and they've been frustrated and they sort of said, forget it. I'm not going to bother with these. And I get it because it can be frustrating. And if you don't understand it or you don't know how it all works, it can really take a lot of time. But the idea of a tool like Points Path is to help you skip that time. So I would encourage people to give it a try. Again, it is free. But even if you don't use Points Path, I'd say, don't dismiss miles. Don't just assume that, oh, I can never find a seat or whatever. It has changed over the years, and the airlines understand that that frustration was causing people to not engage with the programs. And they've tried to make it so that there is more availability. There, you can get a flight. You might pay more points for it, but you can get a flight even at high demand times. So if you've been frustrated by points and miles in the past, give it another shot, explore. You might find that something does work for what you need.
I actually have one more
Sure.
question on that note. I'm curious. So I think a lot of us, we see people traveling the world and flying all over. And I feel like a lot more people now are flying business or first and economy. So what does it look like, the difference in points for an economy flight or a business
You're
flight?
right. People are definitely now moving into those premium cabins, especially post pandemic. We're seeing less business travel, which means those seats are more available that business travelers used to take, the business class seats. And the airlines, as a result, are making those seats more competitively priced for a leisure traveler. As far as points, yeah, you will pay significantly more to redeem for a business class or first class seat. Uh, could be double, could be more. Again, it really depends on where you're going, of course, and what the airline is. Some business class seats are better than others. If you're flying domestically in the U.S., the business class product is okay. It's nothing really that I would necessarily spend a lot of cash or points on. Internationally is a very different story. There's been enormous strides in business class seats and service in the last 10 years. You can get an entire flat bed on most international airlines when you're flying in business or first. Actually, in fact, first class is becoming a thing of the past. Most airlines are moving to a pure business class product, especially internationally. So anyway, to answer your question, you can find good deals redeeming miles for business class. You will generally find them more with airline miles directly or flexible points transferred to miles versus paying for those directly through the bank's portal with your points. The reason being just the cash prices are so high. That goes back to where I talked earlier about there being that leverage between high cash prices and lower points prices. Business class seats can be exactly that sweet spot where you can get a lot of value for your miles if you find the right seat and you find the right price. So it's important to do a lot of research and explore, but you can find some amazing deals. That's how people fly around the world.
So where can people find Points Path online?
Just go to pointspath.com, pointspath.com, no space, no underscore, and you'll be able to download the extension and go from there. You can also find the extension in the Google Web Store with all the other Chrome extensions if you want to do it there. But it's really just easiest to come to pointspath.com and just start right from where we have our button that says download the extension.
You've just listened to the Work, Wealth, and Travel podcast. If anything from this episode resonated with you, I'd appreciate if you share this podcast on your socials. And of course, be sure to tag us at Work, Wealth, and Travel. And don't forget to leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Thank you for joining us on this global citizen journey, and we'll see you in the next episode.